welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. A little later in today's edition, we're going to be speaking with South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez as she brings us the latest details on a wrongful death lawsuit over a child that died at the Harlingen Border Patrol Station in 2023. So we're going to get those details and the updates from her in just a little bit. But as always, we're going to begin today's program by taking a look at what's trending across the border. Starting with Republican Representative Tony Gonzalez of Texas says he will retire from Congress after bipartisan calls to expel him. Gonzalez had already said he would not seek re-election after admitting to an affair with a staff member who later died by suicide. There is a season for everything, and God has a plan for us all, Gonzalez said in a social media post on Monday. When Congress returns tomorrow, I will file my retirement from office, he continued. He also said it has been a privilege to serve the great people of Texas. He gave no further details on his plans to step down. Gonzalez initially denied the affair with his aide Regina Ann Santos Aviles. On a podcast, Gonzalez went on to say that he had reconciled with his wife and had asked God to forgive him. And he is not the only lawmaker stepping down over misconduct allegations. Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell of California says he will resign from Congress following sexual assault and misconduct allegations. He made that announcement Monday, just days after reports that he had raped a woman twice, including when she worked for him. CNN also reported that 3 other women alleged various kinds of sexual misconduct by Swalwell, including sending them unsolicited explicit messages or nude photos. Swalwell is a 7-term lawmaker who had been seen as one of the leading candidates in California's gubernatorial race before dropping out. He denies the allegations against him, but apologized Monday for, quote, mistakes in judgment I've made in my past. Why did ICE agents barge into an American man's home and then arrest him? A Minnesota county is investigating the arrest by federal officers of a Hmong American man as a potential case of kidnapping, burglary, and false imprisonment. The Ramsey County attorney and sheriff said Monday they are pursuing information from the Department of Homeland Security that they need for their investigation into the arrest of Scott Tao, an American citizen. In January, armed federal officers bashed open the front door of Tao's St. Paul home without a warrant. They let him outside in freezing conditions, wearing only his underwear and a blanket. His entire arrest was captured on video. Here in South Texas, 2 Venezuelan doctors have been detained by ICE agents over the past few weeks. One was stopped at a federal Border Patrol checkpoint, and the second was arrested by federal agents as she boarded a flight for an asylum hearing. Reporter Lauren Sierra spoke to the director of a group representing Venezuelan physicians in the U.S. about this case.
On Saturday, Dr. Rubiles Bolivar was at the McAllen airport with her 5-year-old daughter, a U.S. citizen, ready to fly to California. That's when both were detained by Customs and Border Protection agents. She was headed to California to meet her husband for an asylum appointment. That's according to Dr. Jesus Huarcuco, the director of Médicos Unidos Venezuela USA. He said in addition to her active asylum case and a pending green card from her husband, Dr. Bolivar holds a valid work permit through 2030. His organization represents Venezuelan doctors in the United States, many who are now scared to travel.
We can even go to a conference, go to a course, things that we usually do on our job or professions to improve our skills.
A CBP spokesperson confirmed Bolivar was taken into custody at the McAllen airport. In a statement, they said she had overstayed her visa since 2017 and had no legal status. They also confirmed Bolivar's daughter was placed into the care of a relative. According to a statement from the American College of Emergency Physicians, Dr. Bolivar is an emergency medicine resident at South Texas Health System in McAllen. Her detainment comes as the United States faces a nationwide shortage of physicians.
The value of a doctor that is taken out of this job especially in an emergency setting, which is the frontline physician who is taking care of all these situations. It makes an impact very negative to the community, to the care of the people.
Dr. Guadacuco says that around 30% of doctors in the United States are foreign. And with the recent federal pause on visas from certain countries, the shortage could get worse.
It's very worrisome that there is a holding on all these immigration processes that is affecting the number of physicians that are taking care of our people.
Reporting in McAllen, I'm Lauren Sierra.
Last week, Dr. Ezequiel Veliz, a Venezuelan family medicine doctor doing his residency here in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas, was detained by agents at the Border Patrol checkpoint in Sarita. According to Dr. Guadacuco, Dr. Veliz's work permit renewal was halted due to the recent federal pause on visas for Venezuelans, putting him in a legal limbo. In other news, federal regulators have cited 3 contractors for safety violations stemming from the death of a worker helping build the largest immigration detention center in the United States. Serious violations were found by OSHA after its investigation into the July 21, 2025 death of Hector Gonzalez. Gonzalez was 38 years old and was killed in a construction accident as contractors raced to build Camp East Montana in El Paso, Texas. He was crushed by falling materials. The violations were highlighted in a report released Monday by the watchdog group Public Citizen, which scrutinized the companies profiting from work at the costly but troubled U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Detention Center. Gonzalez's death came days after the Army awarded a contract worth up to $1.3 billion to build and operate the camp. 2 of the companies agreed to pay reduced fines of $15,000. The third company is contesting its citation and $11,000 fine. The attorney for a man shot by Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents during an enforcement stop in California says his client was arrested by the FBI after being discharged from a hospital. Attorney Patrick Kolasinski said Monday that federal officials have not said what charges Carlos Ivan Mendoza Hernandez might face. Messages were sent to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office seeking more information about the arrest. Mendoza underwent 3 surgeries and was discharged into FBI custody without any notification to his legal team. The Department of Homeland Security has said ICE agents fired defensive shots at Mendoza when he tried to drive into them. They said ICE officers were conducting a targeted traffic stop in Patterson, California, to Hernandez. They say he is a gang member wanted in El Salvador for questioning in connection to a murder. But his family says he is not a gang member and that he was acquitted of that crime. Congress returns to Washington with the Department of Homeland Security still not funded. And new DHS Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen was warning his department doesn't have funds to pay employees indefinitely. Senator John Cornyn, a Republican from right here in Texas, says social media and optics forced House Republicans to vote against a Senate plan and not actual policy differences. Our Washington correspondent Vinay Simlat explains the disagreement.
Republicans from the Freedom Caucus said they couldn't support it.
It is absolutely offensive to the people that we represent that the Senate would send over a bill that doesn't fund Border Patrol and the core components of ICE.
The House passed its own version before the recess. It would have funded the entire Department of Homeland Security, including immigration enforcement, but that doesn't have the votes to pass in the Senate. Now that Congress is coming back, the leaders in both chambers, Speaker Mike Johnson and Senator John Thune, say they're trying a different approach to fund the department. I'm Vinay Simlat, News Nation, Washington.
And when we return after this very, very short break, we're going to bring in our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, to fill us in on all the details regarding a wrongful death lawsuit involving a little girl that died in Border Patrol custody in Harlingen, Texas in 2023. So stay with us. That's ahead on Border Report Live. We're back in 2 minutes. And welcome Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. In 2023, a child died in the custody of Border Patrol agents at the Border Patrol facility here in Harlingen, Texas. Now, the family is filing a lawsuit. Here to tell us more details about the lawsuit is our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez.
Hey, Rudy.
Hey.
Yeah, those who have been reading or watching our show might remember it was May 17th of 2023. 8-year-old Anadith Danay Reyes Alvarez, and she goes by Reyes that's her father's last name. She was born in Panama, and she and her family crossed the border 8 days before. This was on May the 9th, 2023. There's photos there of Anadith. And she suffered from sickle cell anemia as well as a congenital heart condition. And apparently she caught the flu while she was in CBP processing facility here in Donay, Texas. And they transferred her to a Harlingen Border Patrol station where they say they isolate patients who have certain communicable diseases, but she apparently was not taken to the hospital. Or there's her mother right there who was requesting that she get medical attention, that immediate pediatric care. And she died 8 days after crossing the border in her mother's arms. That's her mother's Mabel, Estanislada, Álvarez, Benedicks, and her father's Rossel, Doney, Reyes. And together they have filed a wrongful death lawsuit with the help of the Texas Civil Rights Project and the Haitian Bridge Alliance and Texas A&M School of Law Civil Rights. It was filed Friday in federal court in New York. That is where the family now lives. So, this case got a lot of attention at the time because of the circumstances, because of the reports of the child's fever spiking to 101, to 104. What came out in the 62-page lawsuit that was just filed was amazing, allegations. They said that, the mother repeatedly went to the medical facility for help. And actually, when the child had 104-degree fever, she begged them to please take her because of her pre-existing conditions. Fevers put her at a very high risk for possible mortality. On the way back from the medical facility where she was turned away and told, well, if she was so bad, she wouldn't, because the mother said she can't breathe. And they looked at her, and apparently, according to the documents in the lawsuit that I read, said, she looks like she's breathing to me. If she was worse, she would be passed out, and they dismissed her. Well, on the way leaving that facility, apparently she was being held in her mother's arms. She looked in the direction of the male holding cell, saw her father, pointed at him, looked at her mother, and closed her eyes. And the mother went running back and said, she's passed out. They put her in an ambulance, and within an hour, she was pronounced dead at a local hospital here in Harlingen. So, gripping details that also came out in the lawsuit was that the mother wasn't told of the death. It was kind of third party. It took several hours for her to be told. She wasn't allowed to ride with her child to the hospital. And after the child was dead, they put the family in a different facility, and they were just saying in a different cell how dirty it was. Description of women's products all over the floor, and they were forced to clean it. And, the lawsuit says in their grieving moments, they were just forced to clean this cell where they had to live on the concrete floor under Mylar blankets. And so, it says it's wrongful death, and they want to be compensated for the funeral expenses, medical expenses, for current damages, emotional damages, and future damages, it says.
Now, how much, speaking of damages, how much money is the family seeking in this lawsuit?
Well, actually, this lawsuit does not have a number pegged to it. It's interesting. There had previously been what was called a tort claim that was filed in May at the anniversary of her death this past May, in which they were seeking $15 million from the federal government. But Texas TCRP officials yesterday told me that the government denied that claim in pre-litigation hearings. So, I'm not a lawyer, but apparently, basically, they went and they said, look, the government did this, and you are liable, and we want this money. And the government said, no, we're not going to pay it, which I honestly would have been surprised if the government just paid it. And so then the next step is to file this lawsuit.
Is this the first lawsuit then in this case?
It is the first lawsuit filed in this case with the help of those three organizations. And, the Haitian Bridge Alliance has been every step of the way with this family. The parents are actually from Honduras, and they identify as this group called a Garifuna, which is an Afro-Indigenous group from Honduras, and they said that they've long faced discrimination and persecution in Honduras, and so the family had actually sought temporary refuge in Panama. That's where Anadith was born. They lived in Panama before immigrating to the United States. And at the time that they came was as Title 42 was ending, and we had thousands of people crossing right there at that same spot, which eventually became Camp Monument from Matamoros into Brownsville, Texas. They were among the families that crossed at that spot. Tremendous overcrowding with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They had a tent facility set up in Donay where they had thousands of people, and they were among them. And, according to the lawsuit, they were just not treated with respect. And the mother had tried to let CBP officials know upon their entry that this child had this condition, heart condition, sickle cell anemia. Here's her paperwork. It says in the lawsuit that they did not look at it, that they just stamped her as having no pre-existing conditions. They did not read the paperwork.
Have any changes been made at the facility since then in how they handle this kind of situation?
Yeah, actually, the CBP Office of Professional Responsibility, called OPR, did an investigation, because we're talking 2 years since the time she died. And they did find that the contractors that had been hired to provide medical care had not effectively acted with her, and provided that care. So they basically placed all the blame on those contractors. They did not say that CBP personnel did anything wrong, but the people that CBP had hired. Keep in mind, there was no doctor on site. There was no pediatrician on site. But apparently, according to the lawsuit, they did not call anyone. They did not call a pediatric specialist. They didn't even call a doctor over the child. That's according to the lawsuit. So eventually, they shut down that facility to medical cases. And so, basically in doing so, CBP admitted that the facility did not handle these cases right.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about that, because it's a medical, they're sending, not just children
isolation
there, but,
cases there, right?
For cases that can be, have some kind of communicable disease, at that time, and still, anything from flu to COVID to anything that, we would want to be segregated or not in close proximity to, but they had no medical professionals at the site.
Right. And, interesting also in this lawsuit, mentioned that when the mother was informed that the daughter had died, apparently it says they tried to coerce her into self-deporting and going back with the child. And just saying, there's nothing left for you here. There's nothing left for you here. But like I mentioned, the Haitian Bridge Alliance really stepped up in this case. This is one of the first high-profile cases that I remember that organization kind of really came of its own. It's a California-based organization. Jerlane is the CEO of it, and really stepped up to represent this family. And they were at the funeral, and they were out in public, and they not only did not self-deport, but they really showed themselves that we're staying, and they got asylum. They were allowed to be released on humanitarian parole, the entire family, and now it's a wrongful death lawsuit. So the first tort claim was $15 million. So I'm thinking, they're probably, they told me they don't know what damages would be, but I'm thinking that they're kind of looking around that ballpark.
And, going back to the family, you mentioned that they were able to get some sort of legal status here in the United States after this happened. What is their status exactly? And did that happen? Do you know if that happened technically during the last year of the Biden administration, or if that something that has come like recently since this second Trump term.
No, after the death of the child, which was still the Biden administration, the family was released. There's 2 parents and 2 older siblings. So Anadith was the youngest. And, you know, there's just all these stories about just how much they suffered. And basically, they were made an example of the conditions that happened at that facility. And, you know, not only that facility, but other facilities. Actually, I'm working on a story about another report coming out about the conditions at the Dilley detention facility, which is just outside of San Antonio, which we've talked about a number of times on this show. So another South Texas facility where they send detained migrant families. And they're saying that the conditions, this is under Reyes, there's a couple of nonprofits that came out with this, that children are held much longer than under the Flores agreement dictates they have to be released. They are held much longer there, and the people are not receiving access to legal representation at the facility, as well as other violation of human rights.
And that kind of, you know, tracks along with when we were following the developments on that McAllen family that was detained with students in the McAllen High School mariachi band. We had a team up at the Dilley facility, and I remember in that press conference afterward with Congressman Castro, one of the things he had mentioned was that a pregnant migrant who had been held at that Dilley facility was actually told by a doctor that you have to eat more because the baby's not growing while you're at this facility, so you need to eat more. But the problem was they weren't feeding her, according to Congressman Castro. So I assume there's going to be a lot to come from that Dilley facility, not just on the children potentially being held there longer than the Flores agreement allows for, but some of the other conditions as well.
Yeah, and not to stray off the topic, but Congressman Castro has been all over these detention facilities. You know, we went live last week from the facility in San Benito where they are sending pregnant migrant teenagers, and he was there, and I interviewed him, and, you know, he was just saying that there's no doctor on site. And once again, if there's a problem, they said they'll take her to the nearest hospital. That's exactly what happened to Anadith, and she didn't make it.
Yeah, it sounds like it, according to this lawsuit at least, that'll be dependent on whoever the contractor is servicing to decide whether or not it's serious enough for a lawsuit. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sandra. South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez updating us on that wrongful death lawsuit, as well as what she's working on, which you can read more about, I'm sure, later on this week on borderreport.com.
Thank you.
All right, stay with us. Border Report Live. We'll be right back in 2 minutes. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. A Chicago area man who said he had to make a tough decision and self-deport to Mexico also had to leave behind his beloved pet in the process. But now the owner and the dog have been reunited. Watch.
This is Coffee. He arrived at Chicago Animal Care and Control in February. CACC reached out to an organization called Microchip Hunters.
They submitted that chip to us because the microchip number led to an owner with a phone number that was disconnected.
Jeanette Garlow is the director of the organization.
Our volunteer Cheryl did a great job. She ended up finding the owner of Coffee on Facebook. And he let her know that he had to go back to Mexico.
Coffee then came here to Border Tails Rescue in Northbrook. It's an organization that has deep connections between Chicagoland and Mexico.
I started it to help bring dogs from Mexico.
Harley Garcia is the executive director and founder of Border Tails Rescue. She says once Microchip Hunters reached out about Coffee,
we were going to figure out how we could help, and our partners, Dogtimus Prime, they were like, no problem, we'll definitely take him back with us.
Coffee then went on a week-long journey to New York, Canada, and then down to Mexico, where he was reunited with his owner, Daniel Torres.
Estoy muy feliz de recibirlo, de tenerlo.
I'm very happy to have him with me, Torres told me in a video call from Mexico. Torres told me because of his immigration status, the anxiety and fear of the federal government's mass deportation efforts pushed him to make the difficult decision to return to Mexico.
Un momento de mi desesperación agarré y me vine.
And leave Coffee behind, worried they might be separated in the process. But he says he's grateful groups were able to make a reunion possible.
Coffee ha ha cambiado mucho mi vida y ahora que estoy aquí, pues más.
Coffee has changed my life so much, Torres said, and now reunited, his canine companion will keep bringing him joy. Victor Jacobo, CBS News, Chicago.
And before we go, wanted to remind you that you can stay informed on the stories shaping the U.S.-Mexico border while you're out walking your dog, or while at the gym, or on your commute home, as Border Report Live brings you real-time updates, expert insights, and voices from both sides of the border in podcast form. You can listen now to the Border Report Live podcast on Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, and you can get both audio and video versions on YouTube. That's going to do it for us today. For Sandra Sanchez right here in Deep South Texas, my name's Rudy Mireles. We'll see you next time.